tell us about your concerns.
Well, thanks, Cory. Look, I do have concerns about the concept of a vaccine passport. I always have, ever since the initial rumblings of these were heard overseas. And I think, it is difficult in many respects to keep perspective on what we're talking about here. It seems innocuous. Recording whether or not you've had the jab sounds all very sensible. But of course, what this is actually doing is it's creating a sort of an artificial naughty or nice register. And we know the government's position is that the vaccine won't be mandated. But what I'm concerned about is if we are to continue to go down this path where we have this digital certificate of vaccination, if you like, it does leave open the opportunity there for the bureaucracy, for private business and even for government at some point to shut off services and to remove rights from people who may have very good reasons for not wanting to take the vaccine. And those people's reasons are their own. It's everyone's individual right, in my view, to make that decision along with their healthcare provider. Now, what we will get into, as we go down this slippery slope, of course, is this risk of setting up a two-tier system where people are almost effectively broken into vaccinated and unvaccinated classes. That is going to divide Australians. It is going to potentially strip rights from Australians, all because they may or may not want to undergo a medical procedure. And in my view, that is extremely dangerous and an extremely slippery slope.
Well, you make a very important distinction between, the government has said vaccines will not be mandatory, but there can be discrimination on the basis if it's mandatory to have an identification that identifies you, whether you've been vaccinated or not. So in essence, you can still be denied some liberties that are available to other citizens, even if they're as simple as going to a pub or a cafe or a sporting event, unless you've had the vaccination or been cleared that day. Is that the essence of the concern?
Yeah, look, that is, and it really is a form of almost coercion, if you like, potentially. That's not what we're seeing at the moment, but the recording of this by digital vaccination certificate does give rise to that possibility. And as you said, we are seeing in the United States now instances like Bruce Springsteen putting up concerts which are only for the vaccinated, and you can only imagine that we'll at some point lead into the denial of services, airlines, movie cinemas, and all of these sorts of things. It is a very dangerous position.
Yeah, indeed, it's even worse in France, where if you want to work or go to a cafe, you have to have a vaccination now. But you said about this coercion, and you raised in your article, two things. Firstly, the Nuremberg Code, which sounds like a giant conspiracy theory going out there, but it does have a provision for forced medical procedures, and so does the Australian Immunisation Handbook, which you referenced as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It talks in the language of not seeking to coerce people into this sort of treatment. And of course, the Nuremberg Code arises in the ashes of World War II, where I suppose there were medical procedures being done on people against their will. And it is a very, very slippery slope that we get into if we start doing this. We don't want to be in a position where we give ammunition to the totalitarians of the corporate world to become almost the agents of social tyranny. This is not a world we want to get into. This is not Australia. We've lost a lot of rights over the last 18 months, particularly here in South Australia, where every 6 months we continue to have the Emergency Management Act renewed for 6-month increments over and over again. At some point, we have to understand, yes, the healthcare system, the healthcare crisis is very important, but our long-fought rights and liberties are very, very important too, and they cannot be thrown out like the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, Alex, I absolutely agree with you. Now, one of your most admirable qualities is that you can walk and chew gum at the same time. So while you're protecting us on these mandatory vaccine certificates, you've written to Cricket Australia in the last couple of days a very pointed letter about some of their officials, representatives and the players taking a knee in the Caribbean on the weekend. Tell me what your concerns are there.
Well, I've got a couple of concerns. First of all, the message needs to be this. To sports people, to musicians, to actors and actresses, Australians do not care about what you think about politics. Let's be very clear about it. That is unquestionably the case. Australians go to sport to watch sport being played. They go to music to listen to music played. Now, what we saw in the Caribbean back on the 10th of July was Australian cricketers with the Australian cricket logo taking a knee for Black Lives Matter, which on its surface, once again, people may well say, well, that's nice. That's a stand against racism. But the trick is this. This is the reason why people who are not absolutely on top of the issues should should refrain from doing this, and that is that we know that BLM is actually a Marxist-inspired organisation, one which the original founders refer themselves as trained Marxists. It's an anti-family organisation. It's an anti-capitalist movement. It's an anti-Israel movement. Frankly, there are so many hairs on this movement that it is extraordinary to think that the Australian cricket team would freelance on this sort of stuff. And I'm curious to know whether or not Cricket Australia are aware of this, are on top of it, and whether they endorse it. So that's what I've asked.
Yeah, very, very good questions. And let's not forget that taking a knee was started by this bloke, Colin Kaepernick, I think, who was a footballer in the States, in protest to the US national anthem. So are these sports people now around the world, are they protesting their own national anthem, the American national anthem, supporting Black Lives Matter, or do they have a clue what they're doing? Is this just corporate virtue signalling and all these patsies have to do it because otherwise they don't get paid? That's the big question, isn't it?
Well, someone's doing the numbers out there. These are all businesses at the end of the day. And obviously there are bean counters somewhere inside these organisations that think this must be marketable. But you have to look at the NBA and what they've done over the last 18 months as well. They've actually backed off from a lot of this stuff because their ratings were tanking. As I said, Australians don't want to see sports people entering into the field of politics any more than political observers want to watch me kick a drop punt in the Senate chamber, which incidentally wouldn't be that inaccurate. I'll say I'd be better at that than some of these sports people would be about entering into politics right at the moment. But not the point. The point is we must stick to our lanes. People are entitled to their views privately. I don't have any issue with that. But when I turn up to a cricket game, I want to see cricket, not politics.
Yeah, the image of you having a drop punt in the hallowed chamber of the Senate fills me with enthusiasm. I look forward to it happening. Senator Alex Antic, thank you for joining me on the Bolt Report tonight.
Thanks, Cory.